Hello, everybody. Welcome. Today is June 16th. It is 2:12 p.m. We are convening a work session to consider the executive appointment for Tyler Andrews as Human Resource Director. Why don't we go ahead and introduce ourselves in the room?
Zach Johnson.
Scott Myers.
Anna Brawley.
Kevin Cross.
Christopher Constant.
Karen Bronga.
And on the phone, we have Mr. Rivera. Mr. Salt.
Randy Phil here.
Thank you. And we also have on the dais
Chief of Staff Mario Bird.
Tyler Andrews, acting Human Resources Director.
Your mic didn't go on. Now it did. Why don't you say, turn it one more time? There you go.
Tyler Andrews, Human Resources Director.
Thank
acting.
you. All right. So as is tradition, we would have representative of the administration make the initial introduction and a brief or not so brief statement from the appointee, and then we'll have a conversation. So Mr. Bird, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The administration is pleased to introduce Acting Human Resources Director Tyler Andrews for Assembly confirmation. Mr. Andrews graduated with a bachelor's degree in economics from the University of North Carolina in 1988. He worked as a technician and later as a union leader with pulp and paper workers in the Pacific Northwest in the late 80s and early 90s. This job eventually brought him to Southeast Alaska, and he has been an Alaskan ever since. In 1995, Mr. Andrews began his labor relations career as an employee with the state of Alaska. Apart from a brief stint as HR manager for the city of Ketchikan, he worked as a state labor relations and HR employee until 2007, when he was hired by Alaska Communications as a senior labor relations manager. In 2008, he was hired by Chugach Electric as VP of Human Resources and Safety, and later served as a senior VP in various labor, employee services, and HR capacities for Chugach Electric until January 2022. In sum, Mr. Andrews has had extensive HR and labor experience in Alaska, both in the private and the public sector, for nearly 30 years. He has a history of excellent advocacy for his employers in labor matters, and also a history of addressing internal issues to assist employees. In our current time, with many public and private employers facing recruitment and retention issues, Mr. Andrews comes to the MOA with the right tools to move our city forward in the area of human resources. I want to point out that from the perspective of the mayor's office, Mr. Andrews has already achieved some of the mutual goals of the executive and legislative branch, finding ways to address employee retention and finding collaborative ways to engage with the 9 unions representing Muni employees. I understand many of you have already met personally with Mr. Andrews. If you have, I think you will agree that the Muni is very fortunate to have a candidate of this caliber here at the Muni. If you have not spent time with him, I encourage you to do so. And with that, the administration urges the Assembly to support his confirmation as HR Director at the upcoming regular meeting on 20 June. Thank you.
Mr. Tyler.
Hi, my name is Tyler Andrews, and first of all, I want to
Sorry,
thank.
I said your name wrong. Let me say it again. Mr. Andrews.
Oh, Mr. Andrews. Okay. Through the chair. My name is Tyler Andrews, and I'm thankful for all the time that many of you have given me over the past few weeks. I really appreciate hearing about your concerns about human resources here at the city, as well as labor relations. And so I'm excited about developing a direction for that group, building that team to make it as strong and supported as possible. And then, of course, working on new processes, some of which we have already started. So I'm pleased to report out on that and happy to answer your questions. For those of you I didn't get to meet with or have coffee with, hopefully we'll get to do that later. And I think it's a great thing to continue to do. So I encourage you to accept appointments. Maybe I'll reach out on a regular basis. You guys are welcome to reach out to me. I want to thank my staff for being supportive in getting those meetings scheduled. So it's really terrific to come into a supported environment. I guess what else I'd like to tell you, when Mario and Adam recruited me, they said they were looking for someone who was objective, experienced, and could provide support for that staff to build that team and make them feel supported. I think I can do those things. I have done those things other places, I can be objective and will do that as we have to address the issues that may be difficult. But I think that's the key. Obviously, a human resource professional sits in an odd role in some respects, right? There's support for the executive, but also support for employees. And so we have to do a good job of that. And we get that objectivity by having good processes that are well run and well recorded and well documented, whether that's the hiring process or the bargaining process or complaint handling, all those things. So with that, I guess I'll make myself available for questions. Is that?
Mr. Cross.
Thank you, Mr. Andrews. It's a pleasure. We haven't had a chance to meet one-on-one, but you're in for I really appreciate you stepping up to the bat. The human resources position to me is always like the hub of our municipality, right? Being a government of the people, for the people, and by the people. And our employees are essentially our government. We've really struggled the last several years. I think the last report was over 300. We're down over 300 employees in the last 2 years or so. How do you see yourselves, and what is your intention to get us back on track for just employee retention and I guess almost rebranding ourselves if necessary in order to attract high quality, long lasting talent, which we so desperately need because we've lost so much of that in the last couple of years?
Thank you. Obviously, all employers are experiencing recruitment difficulty and retention issues, particularly across our state, whether it's in the construction arena, the government, or restaurants here in town. It's tough. And so what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to look at our existing systems and see which ones need to be updated. It's a tough issue. One of our problems is, in fact, pay. So we're going to have to look at that. Now, we have some strong parts of our package, so I don't want to be all doom and gloom about it. We have an excellent health insurance package. We have a generous leave time off package. So we have some good things there. But we need to get up the supply chain for recruitment. So we need to, when I say up the supply chain, I mean we need to start reaching out to people who are developing their careers earlier than maybe we did in the past. So more activities with young people at the high school level, not necessarily waiting for them to get into their apprenticeship or get into their college program if that's what's required for the job. We're going to find other employers doing the same thing. So we won't be alone when we're trying to get up inside the supply chain. But the more people we can expose to the municipality as a good place to work, and they say, hey, I got to do an internship there, or I got to just visit and learn about what that department does, whether that's in public works or at the police department or the fire department, all that exposure, all those exposure activities. And it's high repetition and it's a long-term strategy, but those are the kinds of things we're going to have to do. You've heard from others about the kind of outreach that's already going on. We're going to have to do more of that. I'm really thankful that you all have created the Justice Office that Mr. Amave runs. His outreach is critical for us. So it's all those kinds of activities. It's a game of inches. I don't mean to, I have to be careful about, I don't want to set any overset expectations because there's no silver bullets right now. It's a tough battle for every employer in town. And strangely, I don't want to be alarmist, but I think we're kind of in our nation and our state is kind of a generational change is going on about employment. And part of that's a supply issue. And some of that, we don't know why people are sitting on the sidelines, but people are in fact sitting on the sidelines. What's going on with that? And I think the other thing there is we need to reach out and get people interested about work. So anyway, thank you.
May I follow up? Sure. Just real quick. So I guess my second thought on that is that when I've run into employee shortages on my businesses, there's a pain involved, right? Because what happens is you have, let's say for round numbers, you have a reduction of a workforce. You have 100 people you're normally staffing, and I go down to 70. That 70 people now is doing a tremendous amount of workload, right? Their workload all went up 20% or whatever that looks like to compensate for it. But now when we got to bring other people in, they also are not only struggling with the ability to service their current workload, but now having to train new individuals. And then what you see is there's a large expense of money that goes out in order to build it up. But at the same time, a significant decrease in productivity, even though you have more people in the interim until you get everybody back up and run. And one of the struggles you have is that those individuals that are your old crew that have been doing the 70%, and now that, how do we keep those people? Because, I don't see a way of us, I guess I acknowledge and recognize that workload is going to get harder before it gets better when we add new people to the mix. And so any thoughts on how we can adjust that rather than just say we just need to pay them more, because cost is only an issue in the absence of value. And so how do we create an environment where we retain those hard individuals that stuck with us this long?
Great question. That's a leadership issue. When I say a leadership issue, which includes governance and the executive, but really a little closer to the employee, we've got to create that environment. So those folks who've hung with us and that are it's the old business school J curve, right? In fact, Keoki gave you a really great example of that, didn't he? He said, I'm here. I had to set a new direction. Then I had to build a team. Now he's working on his processes. Well, productivity goes down during that period of time, right? You're in hope that you get to go back up on the other side of the curve. So part of the leadership message on this, we've got to be, number one, transparent with the folks who've stuck with us about this is going to happen. And it's going to be a little scratchy, a little uncomfortable. And we need to find ways to meet their needs and talk to them and find out what those needs are. Because the worst thing we could do is say, hey, we're going to go through this period of unpleasantness or difficulty and not talk about it and say, hey, when that experienced employee that's going to have to take on some extra burden training new folks, we need to listen to them and say, okay, what resources do you need to get that done so we can get it done quickly? And we also have to, and I haven't seen this here, but I've seen it other places, we have to dispense with some old thinking around training and development. A lot of employers, old fashioned, will say, well, I don't want to send anybody to school or class until they've been here 4 or 5 years. I'm like, well, that's kind of backwards, because the sooner we get them trained, the sooner we get to amortize the training cost and get the benefit of the training. So, and the training piece, people consider that as when an employer says, hey, I'll send you to training, they go, oh, that's some love. You like me that much? So we're missing a leadership opportunity there. Now, some folks will say, well, Tyler, you do all that and they're just going to walk away anyway. Well, again, there's another leadership issue, because we need to make an environment that says, hey, it's worth staying here. No, this is not a slope job. If that's what you want, go do that. But you know what? If you had a good time here, after you're done at your slope job, why don't you come back? Maybe you're going to want to have a family. So.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
So
Okay, Ms. Bronco, go ahead.
when we spoke, you talked about speeding up the hiring process a little bit, because if you sit and think about these people too long, the market, they jump to somewhere else, which I appreciate that. And then I think you also mentioned that some of your HR team was offering kind of low salaries based on the qualifications, and that you talked about, really looking at this person has a doctorate or some advanced training that we don't give an entry-level salary. So I was checking that I heard those correctly. And then I wanted to ask, have you thought about, I think your thought about how you don't know where the workers went. I think COVID taught a lot of people that home was pretty valuable and that time for themselves. And so I wondered if you're looking at flexibility in schedules at all. I think there's people who would come to work if they had Tuesdays off, because that's the day they usually go into the classroom with their kids, or they have therapy for some, family member or themselves. And then the last thing, we know quality childcare is so important for early learning and just generationally what this kid's going to become. Have we thought at all about daycare facility at the Muni as a way to encourage women back into the workforce? So those are.
Great. So I'll comment on the first couple things on the hiring process. Most folks, when they apply for a job, they're hoping to go to work in about 30 days or so. And when it starts out to stretch out beyond that, they start cultivating their other opportunities, right? So we've already initiated that. I met with Jared and his team and said, I want you to look at the vendor we use is NeoGov. They help us with the application process and all that stuff. And we have our own policies. I said, you guys need to go through that top to bottom and start eliminating steps that are needless. Having me sign off on every hire and review the packet, I'm not going to add a whole lot of value. I got some other stuff I got to do, right? So steps like that just delay things. We need to look for those. I'm using that as a hypothetical example. We got to look for those, get them out of the way. Nobody's brought this up, but the whole concept of checking the box, and you may have seen advertising on that. There's been some campaigns on that, but wherever we use the default settings of the application process to screen folks out because they check a box, I don't have any clerical experience, I do have a felony, whatever that is. We need to put some in this market. We need to review those things more carefully, because if we don't get that right, we're limiting what's already a small pool. Not a good plan. So we're already reviewing that. They came up with a long list of things. They're assembling a work plan, but I want to be careful about that because that's an incremental improvement. Really, we got to get the pools bigger. We need to move faster. That's good, and we're working on that. But pools got to be bigger. So the incremental improvement will help, because the idea is we won't lose candidates in mid-process, right? So that's a good thing. Opening pay is what I was talking about, and the policy we need to work for is putting our bet even if we don't feel like we have the best pay plan in the market, we need to put our best foot forward with that initial offer to that person and recognize their good experience and their value, rather than setting up kind of a negative bargaining relationship right off the bat. You offer that person that's got 10 or 15 years experience in the job that you need filled, and you offer them the beginner level pay rate. That's not a real great way to start a new relationship. So we haven't made that change yet, but we're going to look closely at that and see what it takes to do that, because I would prefer for us to put our best foot forward. The flexibility on schedules, I'd like us to put together a menu of options there. I know a lot of people are talking about work from home, flexible schedules. There's some places where that fits really well, some places where it doesn't, but I think some other things that need to be added to the mix are looking at some 30 and 32-hour schedules. Those may fit people's lives very much. That might not be a huge seller with existing employees. It could be outstanding with new hires, and they're saying, "Oh, hey, here's a work-life balance package. It's already pre-built for me. I like that," right? So we need to look at some of those kinds of things. I think that was your list. Is there anything?
That's okay. We have
Childcare.
plenty.
Oh, childcare. We could. Sorry about that. We could study that. No, I have not thought about doing that. We are a bigger employer, although our folks are spread out. So I have studied that in the past with other employers, and to make it work, you have to be of a fairly good size, big, and employee concentrations are important. So significant numbers of people working relatively close together helps the economics on that kind of a thing. The tough part on that one is that one of the things that's driving that market is the availability of childcare employees. So that's tough there. Anyway,
All right.
Thank you.
So I have a few more people in the queue. Mr. Rivera.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So, a couple of questions. First is around the policy implementation. So the Assembly has recently approved a couple of policies that are really in, I think, HR's wheel, and that is one, the parental leave policy, and two, the policy for some additional municipal holidays, including Juneteenth, which is coming up very soon, and Indigenous Peoples Day. So that's one question, is around the implementation of those policies, both specifically on those policies, if you have any thoughts, and then just sort of generally HR policies. And then second is around trust. Right now, I think you are in a position and in a particular department which is facing a trust deficit. So what are you doing to rebuild that trust so that municipal employees can feel comfortable coming to HR to file complaints? Thank you.
Thank you. So on the leave policies, first of all, we're observing the holiday on Monday as best we can. I know it's an imperfect solution. So we've prepared administrative agreements for your consideration to provide the majority of the bargaining units with non-cash leave in lieu of the traditional holiday pay or holiday observance. We have one bargaining unit that does not have the type of language in their agreement that prevents them or prevents the parties from implementing changes to the personnel rules. So they will be observing or getting holiday pay consistent, I believe, with that. The others, because, and this is not it's not a crazy thing. Many in public sector bargaining, many unions will bargain for a clause that says if the legislative body changes the personnel rules, we don't have to accept that change until the next round of bargaining. And it's a two-edged sword, right? So if bad things happen, they're protected from what they perceive as bad things. And if good things happen, well, then they have to wait and bargain it. I asked about this from a union business agent that I know well before I ever took the job, and I better understand now what's going on there. So then what happens next is that we will follow through, and we have the obligation to bargain these changes into the agreements with the unions. Of course, some of them might have different ideas about what best meets their needs and how they'd like to accept these changes. So we will follow through and do that. So that's the basic process. I think I answered your question on the leave and holiday policy. As far as trust is built up slowly through repetitions. I think the first thing that I've done already is reach out to you all, or I've reached out to my colleagues. As far as operations and processes, we need to make sure that when an employee does file a complaint with us, that we catch it, we collect the information, we meet with the employee, talk with them about their concerns, and then follow through. And follow through means if there are changes that have been brought to our attention we need to fix those. If there's feedback we need to have people get so that they can change what they're doing, we need to do that. If we've looked at it and it doesn't appear that there is, the employee always has a concern. So I don't want to say that there's nothing there, but if there's not something that's actionable, we have to come right out and say that. So we need to have those good habits that are associated with any kind of complaint handling. You have to collect it. You have to follow up with the person. You have to follow up with anybody else who's involved. And then you need to come to a conclusion and say, here's what happened. And here's how we're going forward. I think that's part of building trust. People need to see that that's a regular process. It's It's treated like an important business function of the unit. So that's what we will do. We will build those processes. I'm a little earlier in that leadership phase with my group here in my 5th week. So I'm still looking to set direction. I'm working on building the team, and we are already adjusting some business processes on the fly, but we have quite a bit to do. So so that's part of it. Obviously, after I'm confirmed, I'll be reaching out to more of the union leaders just to introduce myself and say hi and hear from them. I think that that's a good first step to building trust. And then as I learn more about what's going on with those relationships, I think I'll be able to come up with some more direction.
All right, thank you. I have more folks in the queue. Mr. Rivera, was that sufficient?
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Next, Mr. Myers.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Tyler, thank you for being here and agreeing to do that and step into the role. Couple questions. What do you think the number one issue that you could drill down for the municipality keeping and retaining employees or attracting employees would be? And then second part of that is what can we as the assembly and conversely, what can the administration do to help with that and support you in that role?
Thank you. Normally, retaining people comes down to number one, positive supervisory leadership relationships. That's what usually causes most folks to quit an employer is they don't have a good relationship with their boss. The second one, this is all traditional stuff. Second one is usually they don't see a future for themselves at the employer. They don't see an opportunity to grow either in their field as an expert. Maybe they want to stay at the journey level in their job, but they want to be a highly expert, a master level person at their trade. And the third thing is normally some issue with compensation. I think compensation's kind of floated up here a little bit stronger. But so drilling it down to one, I'm always going to go with the leadership issue. And it's not that we don't have people who aren't trying, and there are people out there who are good leaders, but, supporting a consistent leadership program across the municipality where we're reaching out to people earlier in their career to see if they want to be leaders, to see if that's something they're interested in, and then if that's something they're willing to work on, because really that's a huge personal journey if somebody really wants to step up and take on the challenge of leading others and doing a good job of it, right? So I think that's critically important. So instead of one single issue, I gave you three. We've got to hit all three of those to retain people and have them feel like they want to have a career with us. But like I said, I'm concerned that the pay issue has floated up closer to the top three. Normally it's number three by a big gap. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Brawley.
Wait, second half. How can we help?
Oh, I'm sorry. No, second half. Thank you, Ms. Bronca.
Oh, the second half of his
How
question
can the
was.
assembly help you achieve your goal?
Thank you. Thank you. Need support for the leadership program idea. Need support for making sure that we're doing the best we can. I understand there are always constraints around compensation, but we need to have a solid package. And in some places we do, in some places we don't. And I think the mayor and the executive team have asked me to do my best to set some direction. I think what I'll be giving to Kent has some near-term ideas because I think there's a bit of urgency, and then some longer-term ideas. I guess I'll go into this a little bit more. So the personnel rules are kind of explicit about what needs to happen, and it's not my job to say anything about the past other than I can't find evidence that we have been doing what the rules say. And the rules say that we should be doing regular salary studies, particularly for the classified folks who are what we call the non-represented. So they're not the, anyway, it's good, wholesome stuff, but the basic concept is that the employer should be initiating a salary study, usually with a third party, to say, how do I look? Compare me to other employers in Alaska, compare me to other employers, other government, other cities my size. You get a result back that says, here's what you look like. You're ahead of the market. You're behind the market. Here's how much you're behind the market. They usually drill down to some very specific benchmark positions so that you can analogize across your workforce because you have a unified pay plan. And then the executive presents that to the governance and says, here's what we got. And then obviously there's some give and take about, well, can we accept the recommendation of the consultant? Do we need to modify it? Do we have to reject it because we can't afford any of it? And again, I don't know that it's been done for a very, very long time. And I would say that that's a great way to start the conversation. Unfortunately, I'm concerned about the near term, and maybe we need to make some adjustments before we can get a study completed. And that's not the best way to go, but that might be something that we'd have to consider because anyway. So I'm sorry, I'm rambling a bit, but we have some direction that I think if we'd followed it over the years, maybe we wouldn't be. I can't say we wouldn't be here. Maybe it wouldn't be so painful to be here. So.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Brawley.
Yeah, thank you. And I appreciate the discussion about compensation. I do strongly believe in paying people for their time and paying what they're worth. And so also as the co-chair of the Budget and Finance Committee, I'm aware of the constraints or several of the constraints, but looking forward to working hopefully with you and working out with everybody to try to figure that out short-term and longer term. My question is specific to the mobile crisis team, and I mentioned that we would discuss that. And I know that you're not in a position to say what the plan is, but I know we were talking about, so as I understand it, part of the challenge is the kind of limitations on the fire department's current classifications, which, means extremely well-qualified people with both firefighter qualifications and then EMS qualifications would be on the mobile crisis team, which is great, but extremely expensive. And so I know there's discussion about, which department or departments do they sit in? Do they stay within the municipality or become, a third party at some point? There's kind of different options. And I also had an opportunity to speak with a few of the firefighters on that general topic. And I know one thing that's been brought forward is the idea of creating a new classification, essentially. So being able to get beyond the limitations of what exists now. So I don't know if you want to comment specifically on that idea, but just generally kind of what is your thinking, or where do you see the ability to finally, fully implement this program?
Thank you for the question. So obviously I don't run the program, and I'm not the person who's putting together the various aspects of how we're going to deliver these very important services. So my role is a lot more on the labor relations end of it. I've heard the idea about a new classification. I'm aware of at least two constraints there. One is, and this may be foreign to folks, but in Alaska, via Supreme Court decision, classification for government employers is not recognized as a subject of bargaining. So that doesn't mean we're not going to talk about it, but any executive, I'm speaking very hypothetically, and I would think maybe even the governance body would be very reticent to give up that ability to determine exactly what services we provide and how we provide them through our employees. It's kind of anyway, so that said, I guess the second issue there is, and my understanding of this is not as strong as I would like, but apparently when we create new positions, it does influence our liability under the PERS system. And I think the basic concept there is and I'll speak to this from the theoretical point of view, when you have a pension, the pension provider, whoever they happen to be, is very concerned about creating positions that should be part of the pension, but the employer is trying to create them so that they aren't part of the pension. And usually the pension plan is concerned about that from 2 points of view. One is that they're expecting funding from each one of those positions covered by the plan. And the second one, in the private environment, they're worried about compliance with ERISA, because if you create a position outside the plan and it's later found to be inside the plan, then there's going to be some financial impact that's negative. So my rudimentary understanding of this PERS liability situation is along those lines. And those are the two of the constraints that I've been told about as far as creating a new classification. That said, obviously, it seems like to me there's quite a bit of alignment between the various parties about wanting to make sure that this service gets provided and that it's as robust and around the clock as it can be. So I think if people are focusing on the need of doing those things, there's probably a solution in there somewhere. Anyway, again, they're not my programs to develop or administer, but I'm happy to facilitate the solution or whatever impact that I might need to negotiate if there is one. So.
Yeah, and thank you. And I appreciate it. It's certainly not just on your shoulders to implement. I think just watching how the conversation has gone on for a couple of years now, it does seem to circle around HR issues. So that's why I bring it up, but not because it's your sole responsibility. Yeah, but I hope that we can finally move forward, because I think, as you said, there's a lot of alignment. There's a lot of value this service is providing already. It is extremely expensive as currently configured. And so I think everybody's interested in how to make it sustainable. Thanks.
Thank you. Anyone else? Because I have myself in the queue.
I have one more thing, but I can. wait
Yeah, I
till
haven't
you-
gone yet, so I'll go ahead first. It's interesting you brought up classification. That is squarely an HR issue, and it does have financial implications, and our financial analyst is nodding behind you when you're saying PERS and TERS is an issue. But I hear consistently that getting a new position classified is a barrier to delivering affordable and effective services. And that could be in, as we've talked about, the mobile crisis team, or another example that I recently heard about was non-sworn police officers under 21 years old doing light duty service. They're being told they get minimum wage pay, even though they're qualified basically to get similar pay to the people who are in their first stages with a little professional background. And the reason they're told none of this can change is classification. So it's definitely an area I would like to talk more about in the future. It's not one of my questions though. But I think there is some real opportunity in figuring out a better way, because what I find is DOT, in my experience, is the state's most mature bureaucracy, meaning they get what they want and they don't really work well with others. And I have found many times the nexus of our problems run through HR, ER, any number of places where the answer is no, and that's it, and no work is done. And we've had a little experience around that in just short, small topics. And so I'm hoping we can find some ways to resolve that. But I have two questions on the trust issue, and really they might be kind of the same question. So, you were stepping in and you're kind of gingerly walking around. There was a past, and you aren't the creator of the past, but you're the inheritor of the past, as a number of people like to say, problems we inherited. So I think it's two parts to the same question. How do we foster an environment where employees feel comfortable coming to you with issues in the workplace? Because you're the natural and lawful and appointed place, but in the past couple of years, that became a threat in a hostile environment, in a place where trouble occurred. And what steps would you do to ensure that managers aren't retaliating against employees who come to you? So how are you going to make it safe for people to come to you? And then what are you going to do to ensure managers aren't abusing their position?
Thank you. So first of all, I think that what I said earlier, and I'll stand by that, people have to see that you're taking it seriously and you have a business process around accepting the complaint and talking with them about what they're concerned about. So we've got to follow through and do all those steps, and we're going to have to build that trust one interaction at a time. And then, of course, you have to draw things to a conclusion, say, this is what we found, this is what we didn't find. And if there's action to be taken, we've got to follow through. I can't say that those things aren't occurring right now, but what I can say is it looks like to me that it takes a while. And I think, so one of the things about restoring trust is to develop a program that's regular and is recognized as working. And I would say that's probably not the perception of the employees, and in some cases not the same with the supervisors. In my travels around the city, there's concerns about those. So that's a process issue that I've got to work on. But I think that process issue is linked very closely to trust. To the retaliation issue, first of all, personally, I'm not going to tolerate that. And the employer has an obligation when somebody comes forward to let them know that we're not going to accept retaliation, even if their complaint is unfounded, unsubstantiated, whatever you want, however you want to refer to that. That person should not experience any kind of retaliation for having come forward. It's a gift to the employer that the person was brave enough to speak up and say, "Hey, I got a problem. This isn't going well." Right? We need to understand the value of that, right? And so by taking it seriously and giving the proper notices to people, the other piece is when we have to interact with the supervisor, we need to inform them directly that they need to continue in normal supervision, telling people that they're doing good work, telling people that what they need to do better, including them in meetings. We can't have the ostracization or isolation or that kind of stuff. That can't happen, right? So the supervisor has to have a clear notice from the investigator, the person handling the complaint, that we're not going to accept that. So they can't engage in anything that looks like retaliation, but they still have to stay engaged with the employee, right? And follow through, because sometimes people, when they file their complaint, one of the worst things that happens to them is their boss stops talking to them. They're just like, now I feel like I'm isolated. Nobody wants to work with me, and all that kind of stuff. That's actually, I think that's the most common type of retaliation I've seen over the years is people just withdraw and they stop giving feedback and they stop calling out folks for meetings. And then that person's like, I was just trying to improve things, and now I'm all by myself and I don't know why, right? So those are two key components every employer should do. And if we're not doing them, we will do them. So those are two basic steps that we need to follow through with. But that process issue, I can't have people feel like that they file something and it just goes nowhere. I think you've heard that story on a couple of other issues across.
No, it was worse than going nowhere. It was the HR director walking in with a T-shirt saying, "I'm with the person who has been alleged to be the problem causer." And so it's beyond.
I understand.
The passive stuff was active. Thank you. There are two more questions, I think. Mr. Cross.
I have to go.
Okay.
You can ask my question.
Why don't you go ahead and ask, Karen?
Okay, this is real quick. It says the proof of the degree has been sent, and that's been sent? You've seen the degree? It's weird that we have to ask that now, but.
Through the chair to Member Bronger, I see Deputy HR Director Jared Gerker in the back nodding his head. That is something that we delegate, but I'm well aware that it's also part of the process. So I'm going to trust Mr. Gerker and say yes.
Thank you.
The university sent me a receipt, so.
No, I really appreciate this. This has been probably one of the better interviews I've been part of. Usually but it's been a really important dialogue here and I really appreciate it. So, I'm looking forward to your confirmation. What you guys spoke about, there's a great book called Five Dysfunctions of a Team that breaks down communication and people's lack of trust, and there's resentment, and then they begin with their own agendas and stuff. And I've seen that happen within organizations. I've seen magnificent real estate brokerages suffer from that thing. They think they have it all figured out, and so then they don't become receptive to the needs of individuals. And so what you've said has really rung true. My question is the same thing I ask everybody. Why this job? I mean, normally when I see an individual like you, like we have with our director of Merrill Field and stuff, I look at their credentials and I see what they have, and I like, you realize that like it's tough working for the muni, even in a great situation. I mean, it's a lot of work. It's a huge organization, and so even in the whole process, it's complicated. Of all the things that you would be magnificently qualified to do, why us?
Great question. Thank you. My staff asked the exact same question. I have to say, apparently I am attracted to the tough job, and I like to be needed. And so, gosh, my staff's been great, and they're happy to see me, and they appreciate the support. So that's terrific. And when I got recruited, I was like, well, I was looking at a couple other things, and this had more of the challenge. I'm still up for the challenge. So I know some people might think that odd, coming off of a previous challenge that was really huge, and here's this guy signing up for another one. But I'm kind of like, to those folks, I'd say, jump in the game. It's important to contribute. And so that's my best answer I got for right now. And so I hope I get to continue to make a contribution here. I think that there are things that we do are really important, and having employees to do those things that are happy to be here is really important to getting that stuff done. There's too much work here to do without employees, right? So whether it's the public safety, or it's the health, or it's the great parks and trails we have, none of that happens without folks doing their job. So I guess that's what attracted me to it. And I think there's some stuff I can do here.
I appreciate that. And I think everybody who serves on the assembly understands the realization of you got to love a tough job if you're going to stick around for it. So I appreciate it.
Did you have another question, Ms. Burley?
Not a question. I'll just offer, echoing what Kevin just said, when you said taking the tough job and people asking, why did you do this? I think we're still fielding questions along those lines. But again, I also really appreciate that your appreciation and understanding of public employees, I should say employees in general, right? Workers make things happen, but it's in particular with government and public service. I think that's so important. And to me, it seems like one of the best jobs that somebody could have. So I appreciate that you look at it that way as well.
So I have another question. So this is more of not your philosophy and view, but just practical matters, nuts and bolts of bargaining. I've heard that, like with the Teamsters and the leave that's been the 2 days, the holidays and the parental leave, that we've adopted for the entire municipality, and it's just having to be added by agreement. Is that benefit something that the administration is using as leverage to reduce other benefits for the unit? Right? So when you put a bargaining agreement on the table, it's often a scaling of various benefits that are being applied and various kind of things, concessions that they're giving up that equal out to some improvements, some give and take. Are these holidays and this parental leave being used as a chip in that negotiating process?
I want to make sure that I'm careful about the personnel rules. So I not quite. I think there's limits on what I'm supposed to talk about as far as bargaining goes.
Separate it from
But let me can I
individual unit.
Right,
Just think about it
I am not
philosophically.
aware of that. But if I can get up to speed on that, but I am not. I know that we're in bargaining with the Teamsters right now, so I know that. But I am not aware that I'll have to get myself up
Sure.
to speed on that.
I would love an answer. You can answer it generally when you have an answer. I'm often fond of people who say, let me get back with you, because it bodes for a more accurate answer. But it's a question I've had all along. We've heard we're not going to update the parental leave until the next bargaining comes up, the official bargaining. So let's look at that outside of the holidays, which are the current thing, because it's now. So over the next 3 years, that question will be coming on the table with a number of agreements. My question is that being used as a bargaining chip? Because we didn't levy that on you as a bargain. We didn't ask you to give something up. We didn't ask the attorneys to give it up. We didn't ask anyone outside, the non-reps, the executives. We just offered it, and our intent was to just offer it to the workers who are under bargaining agreements, but you can't offer it because it's subject. So the functional question is that being used as one of those relative coins in a process of getting to an agreement everybody bargains with? Or is it stipulated at the beginning of the agreement? You're just not dealing with it because you want to wait till the agreement starts. So later is fine.
Okay, because I don't know the answer to that right now.
Yeah, and just as a note of methodologies, as a parting gift, Blair Christensen, the former acting municipal attorney, we wrestled around. I forget on what the specific issue was, but it happened to do with items that were being considered in bargaining agreements. And she was very bristly about the idea of us having anything to say about it because it's not our place to negotiate. Fine. What we learned from her, this gift, and it was a real gift, is she said that the assembly can provide guidance, not just generally, but for any bargaining that's going to come up. And so historically, the assembly has provided guidance in like 2012, and it stayed until 2019, only one time, and it was the basic foundation for the administration's negotiation. And so what we were told by Ms. Christensen, no, in fact, you could do that every single time. And that's the reason for that 30 or 45-day window notification. We're going to bargain. Now you guys talk amongst yourselves. And on that day, assembly stopped talking. And so do you understand that to be legitimate?
Yes, from what I understand is that we'll be before you sometime late September, early October. I don't know the history of how that's been done in the past, but yes, we have to provide you with a notice because we have 2 contracts coming up that need to start bargaining in early 2024. And so from what I understand, the process would be that we would give you the opportunity and say, hey, we're getting ready to go into bargaining. I think that's a good thing to do. If it hasn't been done in the past, I don't know why not. But yes, that is my understanding. And so you could actually see us again next summer, probably about this time of year, as we prepare for agreements that are going to come due in the second half of next year.
Right. And
So-
you may see one earlier than all of that. So because
Right.
there is an opener coming for the police department. And so
That's the one I'm talking about. Yes, I think that we would be. I think that's later next year.
not the whole one, just this
Oh,
little
okay.
one. There's a wage
Sure.
reopener coming.
Okay.
So we just had it. It's on this agenda. It was on the last one. And so I'm effectively working on a guidance document, and it'll be the first time we've implemented Ms. Christensen's parting gift.
Yeah, and my understanding is in the past, a lot of that guidance was around, recognizing, for example, the CPI as a basis for wage increases or something like that. I don't know.
That would be 2012.
Yeah, that's yeah. But
What I'm working on now is kind of circulating around the idea of recruitment and retention as a
Sure.
priority.
sure.
And so we can't give you specific negotiate this thing because that's not our job, but we can set the principles. And so that's coming up.
Where I'm allowed, let's have a conversation.
All right. Thank you. Anyone else before we adjourn? Nope. Well, thank you. An engaging conversation, refreshing, and looking forward to Tuesday.
Thank you. I really appreciate your support and your great questions. Keep them coming. And yeah, I really appreciate it. Thank you.
All right. And after a very long day, we are adjourning to enjoy the Juneteenth holiday for the first time as a municipality, for most of us.